any other business. Now, you might have seen on the Facebook group literally about 5 minutes ago, I've been offered an incredible session by Sandra Payne, who some of you may remember, some of you may have seen her before. She is a dyslexia specialist, a level 7 dyslexia specialist. And she's offered to come into our group and talk to us about the signs of dyslexia and becoming aware of that, and how to, as a parent, support your child with dyslexia. Because obviously I am a person with dyslexia myself, so I can talk very much about, you know, what it's like for me, what my experience was like growing up with dyslexia, what my experience is like now as an adult with dyslexia. But she can come at it from the point of view of someone who doesn't have dyslexia herself, but is a mother of a dyslexic child. So she's agreed to come in and talk to us all about how to advocate for your child, how to spot signs of dyslexia, when to be concerned, when not to be concerned, and all of those extra things. So that will be next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I know not everyone can make that. It will be recorded, but if you have any questions for her at all, please do just let me know. Pop them in, because I'll be there and I will be recording it and sending it out as soon as I can afterwards to make sure that we all get the absolute best that we possibly can out of that session as well. Otherwise, for any other business, on the same day at 8 p.m, we have our resources session. So I know some of you come along to that regularly. I know some of you will never have seen that before. That's absolutely fine. Our resources session is a non-recorded, much more relaxed session where I will be here. It'll be similar to the support sessions where I go through different activities, but it's more aimed around you leading it. So you can talk to me about what you want specifically for your child. I can show you specific parts within the community. I can create things then and there for you. I can send you suggested links, you know, anything that you might think of, I can do for you then and there. You don't have to come along to all of it. If you've got 10 minutes at 8:30, brilliant, pop in, ask your question. You can pop it in the chat or shout it out live. I will respond to it straight away, and you can pop out again as and when suits you. But that's going to be on the 17th at 8 p.m. So we've got quite a busy day that day. We've got Sandra at 1 coming to talk about dyslexia, and then the resources session at 8 to do our resources session as usual. The other business that I've got two more things, so thank you for sticking with me. We've got masterclasses. Loads of masterclasses this week and next week, as you know. First off, we have the First Steps masterclass tomorrow, which is mostly for parents of reception kids or younger, guiding you through those very first steps of reading, how to support your child with it, how to make sure they have the absolute best foundation possible so that the rest of reading is just easy for them. Then on Thursday, we have the Year 1 struggle, which is sometimes called running with reading. But that tends to be, if you've been in my sessions, we have first steps to reading, next steps to reading, and then running with reading. So this is like the next stage on. And shockingly enough, we'll talk about everything that's involved in Year 1 and how to support your child throughout that sort of higher level bit of reading that they will be facing this year. So if you have a child in Year 1, I definitely recommend signing up for that one. Come along, brilliant. I will probably do exactly like I did before and pop all of them in like below in the email for the replay. So if you want to sign up for any of them, please do. Then next week, we have one of my favourite masterclasses to run, which is the 6 Steps masterclass, or the C2C, Curious to Confident, which is covering the entirety of reading. So where First Steps is very much, this is exactly what you do to support your child early. The 6 Steps is sort of this great big overview of how our kids learn to read and giving you little bits to support every single step of that way. Some of you, I think quite a lot of you have been to that one already. So obviously, if you've seen it before, don't worry. You might want to come back again, because I know that I chuck an awful lot at you in the space of an hour, like I normally do. So you might want to come back and do it again, but no pressure to. But yeah, and I will say something else about that in a second, because I'm going to be running it again in October. And it may be, if you're thinking, Jen, there's a lot of masterclasses you're doing now, and I don't think I need it just yet, maybe you come along to the one in October instead. But I'll explain that in a second, because the final masterclass is all about blending. Now, I know it's really early on in the year, but if you're finding that your child knows their letters, but is finding blending them together really hard, that's the one you want to come along to. I'm not expecting it to be big this time, because it's the start of the year. Not many people have hit that problem yet. Weirdly, I run this again in like February, and that's when I get a huge number of people coming along, because that's when people are like, oh my gosh, my child can't blend things together. But I'm running it now for anyone who is a bit concerned about it. So yeah, that's the final one. Then the final piece before I do get started, thank you for sticking with me, is I'm going to be running the Curious to Confident Bootcamp again this year. I think some of you came to it last year, great. It's going to be 5 days-ish, like a week-ish, of quite intensive, let's get our kids starting to read. I say starting, it will cover reception through to the end of year 2-ish, and each day there'll be something a little bit different. So you'll have, on one day we'll be looking at book bands and book levels and how to know what level your child should be on. One day we'll be looking at the glossary of terms. One day we'll be looking at blending skills and tricks to get your child blending. One day we will be running the Curious to Confident Masterclass, the 6 Steps to Reading Masterclass, because that really is the overarching one. So if you're like, not now, come along in October, because you'll get everything. You also get the community feel. It's a much bigger sort of experience, and a great way to get your child boosted on that reading. The sign up for that will be going out quite soon for you guys. It won't be going out for everyone else until much later, but I want to give it to you early. And then there'll also be an option to choose the final bonus session or the final masterclass that you want me to run as well. So, you know, I want to be as helpful for you guys as possible. And hopefully everyone who is involved in the community doesn't necessarily feel like this is massively necessary, because obviously you can just send me a message whenever works for you and I will just get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But yeah, do come along, see how you feel. Our support session in October will not be affected by it, even though it's the same week. We will have our session as usual. That day I'll do that day a little bit differently within the boot camp, to make sure that we're not affected by it, because you guys have been very kind letting me have my summer holiday last week. So moving that support session around, I know it was a little bit different to usual. So thank you for sticking with me through that. That is all the any other business, and we can now get into our assessment session. So for those who haven't done one of these before, I think everyone who's live has done this at least once with me. Most people in the group will have done this with me once. But just in case you haven't, these are the 6 pillars of reading. These are the core steps that support your child in reading. Everything ties into one of these. So everything that we do, everything that we support our kids with, will tie into an element of this when it comes to reading specifically. We're going to go through each of the pillars, and each of these little gaps is a sort of level. So there are 6 levels to each thing up to the end of year 1. There are some that go into year 2, which I'll talk about as well, but I'll talk through all of them. I would suggest, I'm not going to show you my book because obviously private and confidential, but draw yourself a little circle. It can literally be a circle with lines in it. That's what I do for every single one of you. And then just make a little note as you go through about what they are. If you do have this printed and ready to go, amazing. I highly recommend choosing one colour for this month. And then in 3 months' time, when we run this again, choose a different colour and we'll go over it all again to support you with that. And then you can really see how much progress your child has made just in that really short time. I'm really excited for some of you to see your child's progress, because I was flicking back through my book for those of you who asked me to send you your child's previous scores. And I know already how much progress your child has made. So I'm really, really excited for that. Anyway. Obviously, do feel free to shout at me in the chat, shout at me in real life. This is recorded. I will trim bits around to try and make it as neat and pretty as possible. But I do have the chat open, so do talk to me if you feel like it. Anyway, first off, our first circle is communication. Right. So this one is it's an interesting one because it starts really, really low. And then it weirdly feeds into comprehension, which can be much, much higher level. So don't worry if your child is really high for this one, but not for anything else, or if they've got certain bits in this that are missing. As with all of these pillars, you might find that there's something in particular that your child doesn't do, or a step that your child has skipped, but has gone on to the next one. This is particularly common with communication, particularly with children who have speech and language, because, for example, they might skip the why stage, where kids are going, why? Because they haven't developed that language, or they're not confident with that language. They might have gone straight to level 5, in which case, great, tick off level 5. We just have to take these a bit with a pinch of salt, because obviously it's the overarching, oh, this is the average child, which there is no such thing as. But yeah, so level 1 for communication would be speaking in 2 to 3 word sentences. So I want cup, or mummy help. That would be a 2 and 3 word sentence. They can listen to really, really simple stories that have pictures in them. So that's like 1 sentence per page, keeping that focus for most of that story. And they can understand really, really simple questions like, where's mummy? Where's Auntie Natalie? And they can point and answer those. So that would be level 1. If your child can do all of that, tick that off straight away, amazing. With level 2, we're looking at developing that understanding further. So if you said, who's that? They might be able to say, auntie. If you said, you know, where are your shoes? They might be able to find their shoes. But they're still very simple. There's a correct answer to those. You don't have to have any deeper thinking. It's who, what, where. Straight answers. They might be speaking in slightly longer sentences. They do not need to be grammatically correct, but they are slightly longer. Like went down slide, hurt finger. That's a simple one. That's also describing an event. But went down slide would be 3. Or mummy, it's raining. Mummy, it is raining. Either of those would be great. And then they're starting to use simple plurals. So that's where you just put an S on the end. Cars, shoes, runs. They're not going to necessarily say, like they might say mouses. They're not going to change things to mice. So that would be level 2. Level 3 would be moving on to describing events that happen. That's what I meant by went down slide, hurt finger. They can start to tell you what happened in the past. It doesn't have to be like, yesterday I went to the park and I played with sticks. It's still really simple at this level. It's like, I had cake. Brilliant. When did you have cake? 20 minutes ago, maybe a year ago, but they can describe the past in a certain way. They're starting to ask those why questions, which for anyone who's experienced them, you know when your child's reached that point. It's very much like, why? Mummy, why is the sky blue? Mummy, why does that, you know, person have green paint on their face? And it's always at a very loud decibel, isn't it? But that's great. That's fantastic. They're starting to show that curiosity and that self-interest in the world and expression. They're also starting to use their first set of adjectives. Now, an adjective is a describing word, and this is where they would use colour, like pink drink, or blue plate, as I've got, green Percy pig, which is on the blue plate. So they're starting to have slightly more specific language. Why isn't this letting me admit, Lauren? There we go. And develop that vocabulary a little bit further. They might start asking for things like, I want the pink cup, being a bit more specific. They'll also be able to, when you're talking about books, when you're looking through books, they're starting to answer those really basic questions. Can you find the duck? If anyone's read the Osborne books, they're great for that. Where's the duck? They just have to look for it and find it. Fantastic. Then you get up to level 4. And this is where they start asking lots of questions, not just why questions, but questions all the time. Hi, Lauren. It doesn't have to be like particularly profound questions. They're just sort of asking all the time. As I say, this is one that some kids just bypass. So don't worry if your child is able to do everything else, but they don't ask questions. Maybe they're just, they know a lot. Maybe it can, I have seen ones where kids don't ask as many questions because they know they're going to get the explanation anyway. So, which is not a problem at all. But with parents who are particularly good narrators, if they're really good at communication themselves, they often explain things to their child as they're doing things. So your child might not ask, Mummy, why do I have to do this? Because they already know, because you've told them. So that's not a problem. If they don't do that stage, take it with a pinch of salt, ignore it. But if they're able to do the rest, tick off level 4, fine. So the other parts of that are things like making plans for play. This is a huge step when your child does go on to it, because you can start seeing their play form an actual narrative. So this can happen whether they're playing with blocks or Legos or whether they're playing fantasy. It doesn't have to be a massive 3-part story with 100 characters and everything. It can be, I'm going to make a tower and I'm going to make it taller than me. That would be making a plan for their play, because they're trying to plan what they're going to do. Even better if they can start saying, I want to use wheels because I want to see if it can roll. Equally, it might be, I'm going to be the princess, you're going to be the dragon, you're going to go over there and pretend to be really scary, and I'm going to come and fight you. That would be making a plan for their play. Again, you might find that your child's teacher is very aware of this and you haven't seen much of it. It depends how many kids you have in your vicinity, which I know is easier for some than for others. I myself grew up quite rural, so I had loads of friends at school, but I didn't necessarily narrate my play too much at home, so it's a little bit harder to spot. And the final one of this level is starting to like simple jokes. You'll notice it doesn't say anything about understand simple jokes. And for those of you who've been with me for a while, you'll know that I have a little girl who her favourite joke at Christmas this year was, what is a jelly monster afraid of? No, what is jelly afraid of? A jelly monster. Does it make sense? No. Did she laugh for 20 minutes? Yes, she did. So that counts. Brilliant. Well done. So yeah, they're starting to find jokes funny, even if they're not quite sure why they're funny. Brilliant. Then at level 5, we've got those sequential sentences and those multi-step instructions. This is a lot harder. This is sort of year 1 level now, where you would say, get your shoes and your scarf and then meet me by the front door. So we've then got 3 steps. Some kids will find this a lot harder than others. Lauren says the terrible jokes phase is something else. It is, isn't it? Absolutely is. And there's only so long you can fake laugh for. Although sometimes they do come out with ones that actually get me, and then I'm like, oh gosh, fine, we're giggling now, great. And then they tell that one over and over again. But yeah, we love them. Yeah, multi-step instructions can be very tricky, and Sandra actually will be talking about multi-step instructions in dyslexia next Tuesday, so do come along to that. But yeah, so it's a harder step, so don't worry if your child isn't at level 5 yet. The other really tricky one that is the big jump from reception to year 1 is having that ability to take turns in conversation. So it's not I'm talking, so you're not talking, and now you've stopped talking, so I'm going to talk. It's a case of we're having a conversation. You've said something to me, I've listened to it, and now I'm responding to that conversation. That would then be taking that in turns, building up that a slightly higher level of conversation, of comprehension. And again, that's something that we see a lot more of and a lot more development of in year 1. And then by the time they hit year 5, you're having full-on conversations, you don't even notice it. And then the final one is speaking in well-formed sentences. At this point, we would hope that most tenses are correct. There will still be some, particularly those irregular verbs, that aren't, and that's fine. So that might be something like slept. Your child might still say sleeped. Okay, they might say I runned away. That's still okay at this point. You want it to sort of have phased out by level 6, and you want to be correcting it obviously as you go, but that's fine because it's an irregular verb. We would hope that your child would be able to say, instead of went down slide, hurt finger, they'd be able to say something like, Mummy, today I went down the slide and then I hurt my finger. If they can say, I hurt my finger because I caught it on the metal, you've got an even greater sentence, absolutely level 5, no problem at all. But that's where we want our kids to be at this point. With level 6, and again, the other thing I'll say is please do take into account if your child speaks multiple languages, they may find this section harder because they are doing both languages at once, which is fantastic. We absolutely want our kids to be doing that because it will help them so much in the future. And I know that that's one of those things that you hear teachers say all the time. You're like, will it really? Yes, it really does. Having tracked an awful lot of kids with English as an additional language throughout their school careers, you really see the change. Some kids who found English very tricky down in year 1 are now in year 6 and absolutely whizzing through their English comprehension with no trouble at all because they're able to think more deeply about what they're doing anyway. So please don't worry if you know that your child has English as an additional language and you're like, Jen, they're in year 1, but they're still, at a level 3. That's not necessarily something to worry about. If you are worried, do come and talk to me because we can absolutely look at that in more detail and see if that's, a delay or if that's just them having to work very hard to do both languages at once. Anyway, level 6 is sort of, as I say, the top level. And again, this is sort of end of year 1. We hope that most kids will get to the end of year 1 with this, but if it's still progressing in year 2, that's absolutely fine as well. But it's where we want our kids to be describing a lot of different things. So I have a spotty pink coat. Brilliant, they've used 2 adjectives, but in general, they can just use adjectives in their day-to-day life. But they're also starting to share those really sort of slightly more complex ideas like those deeper emotions, things that make them happy, things that make them sad, but also starting to talk more deeply about, oh, well, what happens when the sun goes down? Does the sun go to sleep? Does it go around the earth? Let's start looking at that. And discussing things in a more complex way. You particularly see this well, I see this because I've worked in a religious school, where when you start talking about, okay, but what does it mean when you talk about Adam and Eve and the God of creation? What do we actually mean? Or the one that we always do in year one is the story of Noah and the sending of the rainbow, and having that whole discussion around that. So if your child is able to have conversations around that, I'm sorry I've gone down the religious route, that's the only one I can think of right now because I'm working in a religious school, but anything slightly deep and meaningful would count in this. And then equally starting to choose different words for different purposes. Now, I love it when kids get to this point, because it's when you start to see their personality really poke out. And it's things like, oh, mummy, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a dog? Because you could, I could walk it every day, and then I'd have someone to play with, and you'd be able to run at night, and you wouldn't be scared, etc., etc. So they're starting to think of reasons for what they want to start to be a bit more persuasive. Again, this is quite a hard one to do. So if you're like, not sure, let me know, and we'll go through it in a sort of more of a case-by-case basis. Very happy to do that. Then we've got blending, just moving on a little bit. I know we're powering through this, so do please pause me in the chat. Let me know if you want to go back over anything, or if there's anything that I've gone through too quickly. Blending is a great one. Love this one. You are all probably sick to death of me talking about blending. That's because it's my favorite. So level 1 is really basic. They are able to identify sounds in the environment. Right now, I can hear a plane. It is over there and it's going across the sky. If your child is able to do that, amazing, particularly if they're able to make that sound as well. Brilliant, tick off level 1. Level 2, they are able to recognize that initial sound in a word, and can blend. So the initial sound is the first sound of the word, like s in sock or in milk. Both of those are initial sound. If your child can do that, brilliant. The other thing is we want them to be able to blend two sound words confidently. At this point, they do not need to have read anything. You don't have to have a flashcard in front of them with the word on it. You just have to be able to say, okay, the sounds are oh, and your child has to put them together, oh, on. If they can do that, amazing, tick off level 2. Lauren says, mine persuades but very randomly. If you'll let me have lemonade, I'll make you a bracelet. Yeah, brilliant. That counts. That's a nice little bit of persuasion. And I love that style of thing. I also particularly love that because now as an adult, I'm like, oh, I can just have lemonade. I don't need to make anyone a bracelet. Well, anyway, so level 3, again, we are now starting to look at rhyme and alliteration and start to use that. If your child has been able to find the first sound in the word, that's sort of the first step. The next one is to find another word that has the same start sound. So if you're going milk, it could be milk, mum, mountain, mouse. All of those all start with the same sound, which is slightly harder than just having the word and then identifying the sound, because you've got to think about it the next way. Then you also have rhyme, which is where you're chunking that end section. So if you've got the word cat, it would be at, because you've got cat, bat, sat, hat. The end sound stays the same, or the end cluster stays the same, chunk. What I will say is children tend to find one or the other significantly harder. If your child gets both, amazing, brilliant. But for most children, they'll either find alliteration easy or rhyming easier, and they'll find the other one a bit trickier. So again, pinch of salt. Do they get most of this? Brilliant. If you're like, they really don't get alliteration, then maybe that's something we want to focus on next, is playing those alliteration games like Birth of the Bus, Simon Says, which can be alliteration. Yeah, a variation of those. And again, if you come along to the resource session next week, I'll show you exactly where all of those are and we can go through and put them together. If your child finds rhyming harder, maybe it's time to break up the nursery rhymes. Maybe it's time to play things like Silly Soup, which is great for alliteration as well. And you know, what's Finish the Rhyme and all of those games as well. There's also Rhyming Slider, which is great. But again, you know, you can choose which one you want your child to work on and carry on with it. I would recommend, if your child finds either of these tricky, even if they are finding the rest of it easier, even if they're at sort of level 5, but they still find one or other tricky, I would still recommend going back and playing those games, just because we want to shore up those gaps and make sure there are no gaps in our child's learning, so that as they carry on, it just becomes easier. They can understand more, hear more, remember more. And yeah, just solidifies it a bit further. The other half to level 3 is blending those 3 sound words. So again, there's no reading required, but if you gave your child the word d, o, g, would they be able to put it together to say dog? If so, amazing, big tick, off they go. They also don't have to do it in their head. Just for those of you with Read Write Inc schools who they've been shouted at saying like, Fred in your head, Fred in your head. Don't. When they're at home, they can verbalize as much as they want. If you give them sounds d, o, g, get them to say it again, d, o, g. If they want to extend it to being like dog, brilliant. That's wonderful. If they're doing it out loud, they're more likely to hear it. They're more likely to find it easier to say. I don't understand why Read Write Inc makes them say it in their head, because they shouldn't be. Even in year 2, I don't expect kids to be reading in their head. I expect them to be reading out loud because it's easier. I'll get off my high horse. So yeah, if they've got all of those, give level 3 a big tick. Brilliant. Level 4 is where it starts to get trickier because we're looking at adjacent consonants. Now, with level 4 and level 5, normally level 4 is a sort of sticking point where kids wait for ages to get onto level 4, and then they do, and the jump to level 5 is really small, because adjacent consonants are really, really tricky. So with adjacent consonants, you're looking at 2 consonant letters. And again, I'm actually talking about this a lot in the year 1 struggle, so come along to that on Thursday. But you might have the sound like and all in clap. Most kids, you've probably heard this before, will say cap or lap because it's really hard to put those together. If they can blend those 2, either at the beginning or the end of the word, so like milk would be the one at the end of the word, ulk, milk, then fantastic. Give it a tick. That would be level 4. And level 5, I have seen your comment, Cassie, I'll come back to it in just 1 second. Level 5 is when you have 3 adjacent consonants, so like s, r in spray. As I say, once they've got the understanding of 2, they normally jump to 3 really easily. But the step up is quite big. So yeah, so give it a tick depending on where you are. Cassie says, when should they learn alliteration? Not really done that at home and don't think she's done it at school yet. It's one of those ones, Cassie, because it's in that first phase 1, it gets missed a lot. Most kids will do some of it in nursery and some of it in reception, but it does depend on the school. And I know that your school's a little bit different anyway. I would recommend there is no real should. I've definitely had kids still in year 1 who find alliteration very hard because they haven't done much of it. So we go back and do more of it. I would recommend if you think she hasn't got that yet, definitely do a few games with her. So like Bertha the bus is going to the zoo. Who does she see as she passes through? How many animals can you think of that start with like pig or parrot or popsicle or whatever? Porcupine. And just play games like that will help with alliteration. Equally, silly soup is a great one, which I will find for you if you need it. But again, same thing. If she hasn't done it, don't worry, I would go back and do it just to make sure she's really solid. I know she is past that point, but it's a really good idea just to make sure that everything is like all there and ready so that later on it becomes easier. Lauren says they need to read out loud for the entirety of primary, seen so many slip back when they start reading independently, silently. I personally agree. I mean, I don't if they're reading for pleasure, because I think it can be embarrassing for a lot of kids to read out loud and then accidentally say the word wrong. But if they're reading to an adult, I always make my kids read out loud. I've got a child who's just started year 5. I can't believe it. He was so little when I started working with him. He's just started year 5, and he looked at me today and he went, do I have to read that out loud? And I was like, yes, you do. Don't argue with me, read out loud. And he did look at me like, oh, fine. But because we were reading prose, prose. No, we were reading poetry, but it was like Shakespearean poetry. So it's a very weird cadence. That's what I'm trying to say. It was a very weird cadence. So I was really glad he did read it out loud. And at the end, we had this whole conversation about, why did I make you read it out loud? And he was like, because it was so tricky. And particularly with dyslexia, you do miss out certain words that are I can't remember what they're called, but they're like formation words. Begins with an F, like to and the and in, because your brain skips them. And that's fine when you're reading a standard piece of writing that has just been written normally. But if it's got any sort of weird cadence to it, if it's specifically formal language, you need those words in to make sense of it. So really, really important. Lauren says, pink peonies peel potatoes. I love that one. That's brilliant. That's a proper tongue twister. Brilliant. Cassie says, so it's just listing words that have the same initial letter. Thought it was like joining 2 words together, slithering snake, etc. Yeah, so that's the same thing, Cassie. So to start off with, you would be listing things that start with the same sound, because you're getting your child to identify things that start with the same sound. When what you're talking about with slithering snake comes into school a lot later, and that's a narrative choice. So that would be sort of, I mean, I do some of it in year 1, but I think it's in the syllabus in year 3, to start using alliteration for impact. But this is where it's really important that our kids are able to do things like pink peonies peel potatoes. Thanks for that, Lauren. Because if they're able to do that and they're able to identify that initial sound, they can then create that alliteration for narrative later on. Otherwise, they have to go back at this point and be like, oh my gosh, what does snake start with? What other words can I think of that start with s? I don't know. Does that make sense? So that's why you want to be moving them along. So she can already do the first bit. Brilliant. That's wonderful, Cassie. So she's already got the alliteration skill. She'll just start using it for narrative later on, which is all that it would be. And then finally, we have level 6, which is reading those multisyllabic words confidently. This doesn't mean they have to read the word elephant in one go. They can absolutely break it down, chunk it, and then read it, because the next level up would be fluency based. But we do want them to be able to remember all the sounds, put all the sounds together, like caterpillar would be cat, pill, sounded all of those out, put it together, caterpillar, brilliantly. Brilliant. The other part would be reading prefixes and suffixes. So like unhappy, they understand that. Or skipped is a tricky one, but skipped would be one because you've got the ed on the end. Skip, ed, skipped. So they can do all of that, would still be level 6 blending, because they're able to chunk the words to make them more legible. So feel free to put your scores in the chat if you want to. You can direct message me, and I won't say the scores out loud, because that means that, you know, they won't be shown to everyone. But do pop them in the chat if you feel like it. Otherwise, let's go on to phonics. Now, phonics level 1, again, it's single letter sounds. So these are all the sounds of the alphabet except for Q. If your child can recognize and say those super quickly and super easily, tick that off. So when I say that, I mean, if you hold that up and your child goes G, brilliant, tick it. If they say G, pause, that might be something you want to work on. But that's great. With this, the other thing I would say is it might be an idea, I know some of you have already, well done guys, to go through the phonics sounds assessment tracker, which will come up in a second, which looks like this. So I would just run my finger along, get my child to say all of those sounds and tick off all the ones they know. If you're in year 2, you can start looking at the letter name as well, or the end of year 1 if you feel like your child's confident. But just go through and do all of those sounds there, because that'll give you a really solid understanding of what your child knows and what they don't. With level 2, we are looking at consonant digraphs. So that is specifically these ones up to there. So qu, ng, ch, sh, because they all start with a consonant sound. So they are consonant digraphs. If your child can do all of those, tick, amazing. Then level 3, we start looking at vowel digraphs and R-controlled digraphs. So this should be by the end of reception. That's these two, ignore I for a second, but all of these ones and all of these ones up to where at the end of phase 3, not phase 5. All of those, great. If they can do them, that's level 3. Again, phonics is really easy because it's just knowledge based. So if your child knows them, tick. It doesn't necessarily have any other element. Everything else comes together in a different way. So like through blending or through fluency, or comprehension rather than, yeah. Then you've got level 4, which is an interesting one again. Sometimes kids can do some of level 4 and then skip to level 6 and then come back to level 4 later on. Yeah, but trigraphs are the first one. So you've got IGH makes the sound I. Then you've got ear, air, and or year. Those are the only 4 that your child needs to know at this stage. Year 2 has a few more, but we will get to that when we do year 2, as we go through our year 2 stuff. So if they can do that, maybe give half a tick to level 4, and then spotting and reading split digraphs accurately is the other half of that. Split digraphs are these ones. That can take kids a really, really long time. So don't worry if it takes your child a while to get to that, but they're able to do trigraphs really quickly. What I tend to find is once you've focused on split digraphs, kids get them. But if you haven't focused on them, it's hard to pick up through osmosis. So we do go through them quite intensely, quite quickly in the community, and you can absolutely skip through to where it says split digraphs and do that. But yeah, you might find that, oh no, they can do half of level 4, but not the other half, but they can do level 5. Great. So we'll come back to it. We can be a little bit weird about that one. Then I don't know why I did that, never mind. Level 5, we are looking at some alternative ways of writing sounds. So this, in here, would be all of phase 5. So ignoring split digraphs, it would be all of this section, which doesn't want me to highlight, that's fine. There you go. So A, ow, I, E. The point is your child already knows one way of writing these, and this is a different way of writing them. What I will say is if you have, and I know you've probably heard this before, if your child is doing read, write, ink, it might be that they've already learned that sound and that sound as the alternative. That doesn't mean that's not a problem at all. It just means that you will now need to focus on that sound and that sound as the alternative. Read, write, ink does that because read, write, ink does as they want. Every other scheme doesn't. But these are the alternative sounds that you would want to look at. Some schools will also use some of these as the alternative sounds and include those, but don't worry, that these are sort of the basic ones you want your child to know. There's a really aggressive alarm going off that side, sorry. The other thing is understanding some rules. So things like AY is on the end of a syllable or the end of a word, same with OY, but don't worry too much about the spelling rules. They tend to come as your child is learning. If they've definitely got that, brilliant, give it a massive tick. But if it's something that you're still working on, no problem. You can probably still tick off level 5, just keep it in mind as something you want to work on with your little one. And then finally, level 6 is recognizing all the alternative ways and is able to understand the rules for each, beginning to understand the rules for each. So it's just sort of combining all of these together and having a lot of confidence. It's also including these in year 2. So it might be that they are really solid on 4 and 5, but you haven't done much of the year 2 stuff yet, which is understandable because it's September, so there's 1 month worth of the year 2 stuff. So they would know that sound, for example, but they don't necessarily know all of them. So you can carry on with that in a little bit. Now we're on to the higher level stuff. So again, you might find that your child fluctuates a bit, particularly actually with phonics, because what you might find is that your child knows all of those and doesn't know anything else, but actually their vocabulary is really strong or their communication is really strong. So don't worry if it is a bit fluctuating. That's not a problem at all. So with level 1, we're sort of building on from oral fluency here. They are speaking in full sentences. They might use basic vocabulary like I want the cup. Great. They might sometimes confuse words like they might confuse pizza or spaghetti or lamppost and lampshade. Both of those perfectly fine. That would be level 1. Something's gone jingle. Level 2 is that they are rarely, unlike me, they are rarely struggling to express what they want to say. So I am hungry, for example. I need the loo. They are expressing what they want using their words. They're not finding that hard. They're also starting to use new vocabulary, even if it's incorrect. So they might say something like, the lowly bridge. And you're like, oh, what? And they've used the word lowly because they've heard it before. They've not quite understood that lowly actually means humble. So what they've done is say, oh, the lowly bridge, meaning the low bridge. That's great. They've heard a new word. They're starting to experiment with it. It's incorrect. It's not quite right, but they've tried. In that case, you just correct them and say, oh, lowly means humble. I think you mean like the low bridge, or I can't think of another word, but that sort of thing. At level 3, they're starting to use really specific words like, can I have the glass rather than the cup, or the mug, or the tumbler, if you want to be fancy. They're starting to use those specific words, particularly within a category. This, you can also see this like naming birds. Can they name a seagull, pigeon, blackbird? Starting to use specific words instead of just the terminology like bird. And And then they're starting to ask for explanation if they hear a word that they don't know. So if you said the word, oh, can you pass me the tumbler? They might say, what's a tumbler? And you go, okay, it's a chunky glass with pretty patterns on the side. Brilliant. The other one is they can identify words that have the same meaning. So for example, happy and thrilled have the same meaning, so they know, they can understand that that both means the same thing. Or sad and upset is another one. Lauren says, you told me to calm down because I was being interactive, meaning hyperactive. That's a perfect example, Lauren, of trying to use that new vocabulary, trying to try that new word and not quite getting it right. But I love it. I feel like I should calm down because I'm being interactive. I like that. Rather than hyperactive. Brilliant. Now level 4 upwards actually involves reading. So if your child isn't reading a lot yet, this might not be one that you can tick off. You might have to pause at level 3. Fantastic, that's brilliant. If your child is reading, so this is sort of end of reception, year 1 level, when they are reading, they admit that they don't know a word. So what does that word mean? So it's not, they can't read it, they can sound it out. Let's say they take the word hyperactive. They read the word hyperactive, well, that's a very long word, and then they go, what does that mean? If they're able to ask you, what does that mean? Great, you then explain it to them. They might need to be reminded about it several different times. They don't just pick it up and remember it, but that's great. Level 5 is similar. Again, they're identifying that this is a new word. You might then tell them what that is, and then they can remember it as it comes up later on. So if you said, okay, we're reading about the hyperactive guinea pig, or they say, the hyperactive guinea pig, what does hyperactive mean? Oh, it means really, really active, lots of energy. And they go, okay, the hyperactive guinea pig. And then 5 minutes later, they read about, met the hyperactive gerbil. And they go, oh, okay. And you go, oh, what does hyperactive mean? Really, really energetic. Brilliant. And then later on, they can use it again. That would be level 5. Now, the difference between these two levels is because their vocabulary is expanding at such a speed, their memory is picking it up really quickly. And they're starting to pick it up a lot more often, which is also partially because they are picking up so many new words, they're able to combine it all together and just retain it in a much higher level way. Again, this is sort of end of year 1, start of year 2, end of year 2 even. Different children will reach this phase at different points, depending on their previous memory skills, their previous blending skills, their previous vocabulary skills, their previous communication skills. There's an awful lot that ties into it. So if your child is sort of stuck at level 4 for a while, don't worry. We can work on that. We can build up that skill as well. And then level 6 is the really hard one. If your child is able to do this before year 2, I am very impressed. Most children will not be able to. But this is where, when they are reading a new word, they work out the meaning for themselves from context. So for example, let's take our hyperactive guinea pig. Our hyperactive guinea pig is whizzing round the cage over and over again, all hours of the day and night, and keeping Timmy up. And then they'd look at the word and they go, hyperactive. Oh, that means really, really energetic, because he's doing this all the time, all the day, all the night, whizzing around everything. He's got lots of energy. So they've then worked that out from context and they've remembered it for the future. This is the point we want our kids to get to, because it will suddenly just open up the world of words. They will expand their own vocabulary from that point on, but it is a really, really tricky one to learn. So don't worry if it takes your child a while. Now, moving on to fluency. Again, do pop in the chat if you have any questions, etc. Or if you're watching on replay, equally, pop me an email. I will be on my laptop almost all day tomorrow, from probably about 10 o'clock in the morning till about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning the next day, because of masterclasses. So do get in touch. With our fluency, there are 2 different sections for fluency. One of them is tricky words and high frequency words. So that's sort of the instant reading of words. And the other one is the instant reading of words that they can blend, which is sort of non-overt blending, or immediate blending. So yeah, we'll go through both of them. It is not uncommon for kids to have a 0 in this section, because again, it's all about, the first few sections of this is all about memory. So if your child hasn't come across these, they can't remember them, don't worry. Lauren's got 5s and 6s so far, gone up from last time. That's wonderful, Lauren. That's really, really good to hear. I thought that was probably the case. I wasn't actually sure if you were coming today, because I was like, you've got pretty sure you've got most of these. Your little one you've worked really hard with your little one. She's made amazing progress. And I'm sure her year 2 teachers are absolutely thrilled with her as well. So first off, we've got a few tricky words and high frequency words. The difference between the two: a tricky word is a word your child cannot sound out. So for example, I, know, go, to, into, and the. Equally, words like my and by, or even a word like. Like, yes, they will be able to sound it out later, but it is introduced as a tricky word because it is used so much in books before our child learns split digraphs. So if you come across a word that you know your child cannot sound out because it makes a weird variation on the sound, then I would say it's a tricky word. I can just tell you what it is. We can move on. At level 1, we want them to be able to recognize a few of these. So that might be I, know, go. Brilliant. Or to, into, the. If they recognize a couple, amazing. High frequency words are words that can be sounded out, but are used so often in books that we want them to be recognizing them instantly, like in, on, at. A is another one, All of those can be sounded out, but we want them to know them immediately. So they are high frequency words because they can be sounded out, but happen a lot. Essentially, that's the difference. And again, we want our kids to be able to know a few of those. But again, at level 1, maybe we want between 3 and 6 words our kids know like that. Brilliant. The other thing about fluency is it is a higher level thing. So I would not expect a lot of reception children to get past level 2, whereas in year 1, it does sort of like skyrocket because of the different ways that we teach. In reception, we are focusing specifically on the first 3 pillars: oral fluency, phonemic awareness and phonics, or communication, blending, and learning letters. That's what we want as sort of the core skills. We want to make sure our kids are really solid on them. When they get to this level, this is sort of year 2, let's sort of build that up, get them working higher and harder, and yeah, they can do it. Way. So level 2 is identifying just more of those, and they can identify them not just in flashcards being held up like that, they can identify them in the text. So for example, if your child was reading the sentence, the cat sat on the mat, your child would be able to identify the and on instantly without sounding it out. If your child is coming across those words and you know they know them on a flashcard, but they're still going you're not quite at this point. And that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. Keep going with those flashcards. You might want to have the flashcards if you're doing the sentence and go, oh, this is this word. What's this word? And your child will then go the and start to spot it in the sentence. Brilliant. All of that is absolutely fine. But the point is, in level 2, they can read those a few tricky words between maybe 6 to maybe 10 in the text, tricky high frequency words in the text without sounding them out. So yeah, moving them from flashcards to a book as well. Level 3 is starting to recognize a wide range of these. So 20 words, 25 words, they are recognizing them really, really quickly. They can recognize them in the text, and they are also starting to spell a few of these. As I say, this is more of a year 1 task. We don't focus on spelling in reception. I do include it in all of our stuff because it can be really useful to have, but it's not expected. It is expected in year 1, which is why we have an extra amount of work to do with it in year 1. But yeah, so you might find that if your child is in reception, they've managed to do loads of the other stuff, but they've got stuck at level 1 here. That's not a problem. Oh, bless you, Lauren. I hope you had a nice nap. With level 4, we're now moving from tricky words and high frequency words onto speed of reading and actual fluency of reading. So for example, if your child has the word, I always use the word design, they look at the word design, they sound it out the first time, they read it, they work out what it is, and then the next time they come across it in the text, they go, oh, I've read that one already, that word is design. They might sound it out and then say it again because they've already worked it out. As we go through the text, hopefully they're going to get to the point where they just go, oh, she design, or that design was, they start recognizing it instantly. We want this to be the case, particularly with strange words, and what we can start doing is pointing that out to our kids. Oh, look, this is a weird word, glue it in your brain, make sure you can remember it. Where else can you spot it on the page? Okay, let's read the whole page. Brilliant. But at level 4, we want them to be able to remember those repeated words as they're reading. That doesn't mean that from one day to the next they can remember it. That doesn't have to happen, but within the text itself, because that's two different styles of memory, so it's two different levels. But for level 4, we want them to be able to have that sort of short-term memory and awareness of shape. I will also say, if your child is dyslexic, they will find this a lot harder. I definitely found this a lot harder, but it is still doable. You might want to skip a little bit and come back to it, as with the other ones. It might be that level 4, you're like, oh, well, you know, my 30-year-old child still can't read that one. So maybe at level 5, no problem. As I say, pinch of salt with all of these. With level 5, we're looking at blending as they go. Now, this is hard. And again, it's one of the end of year 1 requirements. And what I find really interesting, and I think there are a couple of people in this community who've seen it happen, which has been great. Kids tend to go from sounding out every word to blending as they go, like that. And you don't really notice it's happened until it happens. If your child cannot blend as they go at this point, do not worry. Even if your child is in year 2, please don't worry. Keep them sounding out. The worst thing you can do, and again, sorry, Read Write Inckers, the worst thing you can do is try and force kids not to blend, because it will just slow them down in the long run. What we will find as kids get more confident is they start blending faster and faster and faster. The way that this will sound is they start to elongate the word. So if we're taking the word, this sentence, the cat sat on the mat, to begin with, your child will say the, at, cat, at, sat, on the at mat. It's very slow, very robotic. They're sounding and saying each word. When your child starts blending as they go, it will start to sound like this. The cat sat on the mat. The cat sat on the mat. Because they're not having to repeat that word, they are blending it as they go, and they are remembering the whole sentence at the end. Brilliant. This is where they start getting faster. Now, a lot of people, and I'm not saying parents, I'm not saying teachers, but I have seen both do this in the past, through no fault of their own, because if you think that's what you've got to do, then of course that's what you're going to try and do. I particularly see it in student teachers, when they want their kids to be reading more fluently. They tend to say, okay, no, sound, blend as you go, elongate that, oh no, what did that say? Don't pause between it. I would still say, break that word down. If your child isn't at that point yet, don't push it, because they need that solid foundation. They have to get that solid foundation and carry on. Lauren says, I feel like mine skipped blending as she went. I never really remember her elongating, although I do make her pause to sound out words when needed and would blend back together and elongate if she was really stuck. Yeah, that's what I mean, Lauren, about that, because I've really over-exaggerated what I just did, because it really does go, you're exactly right. For most kids, it really does go the, at, cat, at, sat, to the cat sat. That's it. That's elongating. The cat sat on the mat. And even that I've over-exaggerated, because they're just blending as they go. And it's because they've got bored. So they're picking it up more and more quickly. And the quicker they work out how to do that, the smaller that amount of blending as you go is. So when you get to this point, it tends to be, I mean, the fastest I've seen it go from segmenting, so at, to blending as you go to full reading was 1 day. I had one child who on Wednesday was segmenting, on Thursday started elongating because they were bored, and then on Friday they were reading. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, I'm happy with that, brilliant. It can, obviously, it doesn't happen for all of that. For some kids, it does take a month of them sounding it out and blending it as they go. Fantastic. We love that. We want our kids to go at our own pace when it comes to this step. We do not want to push, but it can happen really fast, which is amazing. Yeah, that can, it can be a weird one to listen to as kids are doing it. But again, it's one of those ones where as long as they are getting it right in their brain, it can sound however they want it to sound. And then the final level is able to read many words rapidly. They are blending in their heads for the majority. And by that, I mean, they're going cat, sat, but in their heads. And they are only starting to sound out those new unfamiliar words. So if they come across a word they haven't come across yet, so for example, I've got mastery on my page right now. So I would go ast, e. They might sound that out. They might go mastery. Brilliant. They've sounded out the word. They're then able to incorporate it and carry on. That would be a level 6, big tick. Again, there will always be some words where they read it wrong. I'm 30 and I will still always read certain words wrong and go back to them again and again. That's not a problem, but this is the step we want to get to. And as I say, the jump from level 4 to level 6 can be very quick. I was thinking about year 2. There's another step, but it's gone from my head now. Oh, that's it. Level 2. So year 2 is a really hard one to think about. It's actually sort of year 2 to year 5 is when you see most kids do it. It's starting to read ahead of what their mouth is saying. This can be really tricky. And I think there's some year 2, some secondary schools are doing training on this as they go, actually. But you might do it, you might not do it. It's where, so if I'm reading my piece of paper here, it says children learn that half means one of two equal parts and whole means complete. Now, as I'm reading that, I'm actually scanning the word ahead to try and work that out. So that would be a sort of higher level thing, just for those of you whose kids I know are solid on level 6 and ready to do the next bit. Referee caught Lauren's little one out this week, couldn't get her head or tongue around it. No, fair enough. My year 5 boy today found refuge really tricky. He said refugee because he's seen that word a lot with 2 E's on the end, and he couldn't get his head around refuge. Fine, no problem. That came up several times. We just went over it. There'll always be something to get him stuck. And finally, our final level, thank you for sticking with me. I know we're running a little bit over, but we've got level 1, comprehension. Look for it. As I said right at the beginning, with the oral fluency, they are literally looking for the answer in the book. Can you see the tree? Where is the tree? Brilliant, there it is. They don't need to read, they don't need to do anything, they can just do that straight away. Level 2 is look and think, so it's slightly more complex. Can you find me something that is yellow and round? They're having to do 2 steps for that. Can you find me something that is cutlery? Brilliant, they're having to work out what cutlery is and then find something that matches that. So they are having to identify what they are being asked first, but the answer is still there, it's still easy. They're not having to do any sort of critical thinking. Level 3, they're starting to use their imagination to work out what might happen next. So hypotheses are great for this. Oh, what do you think Floppy's going to do next? Can they give a valid response to that? Brilliant. What do you think the character's going to do about this? What do they think is going to happen? Again, they don't need to think too deeply about this. They just need to have an idea of what's going to happen and why. That's a brilliant level 3. I think Floppy's going to hit the snowman because he's going too fast and he can't see it. Brilliant. Level 4 is using that same structure, but at a slightly higher level. This is where they have to be reading themselves to pick this up because they have to use the information that they've read to answer the question. So why is the boy sad? You've just read an entire page about why the fact that the boy got given a scarf by his grandpa and then it blew away in the wind. The boy sat down on the stairs and cried. They then have to go, the boy is sad because he lost his scarf. So they're taking the information that they've read. And again, this is slightly different from responding to a story. Responding to a story would be sort of look and think. Level 4 is when they're reading it themselves because they are having to retain what they've read in their own memory, which is a significantly harder task to do. But they've read about this boy with a scarf. They've read that the boy has lost his scarf because that's what's happened. And now he's sitting and crying. So if you say, why is he sad? They are able to say that he's sad because he's lost his scarf. That would be the next one. So ultimately, the answer isn't right there. They've had to work that out through their own work, their own reading, their own memory. Level 5 is when they're starting to give those explanations for their reasoning. So this can be done, in day-to-day life. Why can't you cut a tree down with a spoon? Or can you cut a tree down with a spoon? They would say no, because a spoon isn't sharp. A spoon is bendy. Or yes, you can, but it's going to take a really long time. Either of those would be great because they're starting to give their reasoning. In a story, it might be things like, what would you do in that situation? So if you're Floppy and you're going too fast, you're going to hit the snowman, what would you do? So they might say, okay, well, I would spin and I might just hit the snowman. Great, because I'm going too fast and I can't stop. It might be I would try and sit down so that I went slower. But they're starting to give their own opinions on what they would do and why they would do it. So it's starting to think a bit more critically. And then level 6 is the final and hardest level because they're now taking what they know and what they understand, like I know I would do this, and pretending to be the character. So this is where you're starting to get that insight into other people, into what they've read. So instead of saying, so I'm Floppy, I'm going to do this, it would start being, what do you think Floppy is going to do and why? I think Floppy is going to keep going and hit the tree or hit the snowman because he's too focused on the squirrel and he won't notice it until the last minute. I then think he's going to feel really bad about it. So you're starting to get them to give answers that they're not personally involved in. So it can be things like, I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen the experiment of the baby with the broccoli and the crackers, and them giving the mum the broccoli because the mum's like, oh, the broccoli's the best. And they don't understand why, but they're doing that. So again, that's what we're wanting our kids to do. I personally would eat the chocolate cake in this book. There's a massive chocolate cake on the counter and grandma's told me that I can have a slice. I might eat the chocolate cake, brilliant. But let's say Molly hates chocolate cake. I know she hates chocolate cake because I've just read about it. What's she going to do? Well, Molly isn't going to eat the chocolate cake. She's going to have a banana instead. They're putting themselves in the shoes of the character, giving the characters reasons, and then working from there. This is very hard. This is definitely a year 2 thing. If your child is able to do it already, that's amazing. It shows really good empathy, but do not worry if this is something that takes a long time to develop. And in fact, I still have a few kids who really do find this tricky, reading higher level work as well. So that is all of our assessment session. We have absolutely whizzed through that. Well done to everyone who has stuck with me through it all. Again, if you want to share your child's levels with me, either through this or through Messenger or whatever, I do have my book. So I have got all of our sort of baselines, and I'm very happy to track our next assessment and our next assessment and so on and so forth, if that works for you. Equally, if you don't want that, if you want to keep it private and keep it to yourself, that is absolutely fine. There is no pressure to share anything. The thing I will finish off by saying is if you have any questions or queries or anything from today has made you go, Jen, I need to work on this, or I don't know what my level was for this, can we go through it again? Just pop me a message. I will do my absolute best to answer as fast as I possibly can. Maybe not tonight, but I will absolutely get to you as soon as I can. If I ever don't get to you, please do just poke me. One of my poor people, luckily, they know me very well, but I completely missed a message. So it's only ever an accident. As you hopefully know, I do tend to respond very fast, and will always do my best to do so. So please do, if I miss something and you're like, Jen, you haven't responded in a day, please do just poke me, or 2 days max. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, so hopefully you're all happy. Hopefully you found that useful. I'm going to stop recording now and see if anyone has anything that they want to chat about. But I hope for those who have stuck with me to the end, I hope you have a wonderful week. And I will see you at the dyslexia specialist screening or chat with Sandra Payne next Tuesday at 1 p.m. And if not, I'll see you at the resources session at 8 p.m. the same day. Bye.